Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well today. This time we are going to be talking about WWF Royal Rumble on the SNES. Royal Rumble really plays like a better version of WWF Raw, which is weird because it came out before WWF Raw, and you would have expected the controls to have gotten better as the series goes on and not worse. But that's sort of how it felt with this one. This is the WWF game that I've had the most fun with so far. It doesn't have as many features as WWF Raw does, but I was having a lot more fun with this one. And I think what it does have, it does better than what WWF Raw was trying to do. There is still the same stupid difficulty setting, and there's no nice way for me to put it. I just think the difficulty setting is really stupid, where you pick from 1 to 10. I really wonder, again, why they didn't go with easy, normal, and hard, but I guess they wanted to do this instead. The roster in this game is pretty good. It's interesting coming from Raw to this game. There is a difference between the SNES roster and the Genesis roster as well, but I'll talk about that once I cover the Genesis game. Here's a quick rundown of the wrestlers that are in this game. Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Razor Ramon, Randy Savage, Crush, Lex Luger, and then the ones that are exclusive to the SNES are Ric Flair, Mr. Perfect, Ted DiBiase, Yokozuna, and Tatanka. It is a pretty good roster, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was a ROM hack out there that combined the rosters from both the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. There are only a few game modes in this one, which, again, is kind of disappointing, but what is in here is done very well. You can have an exhibition match, a tag team match, a 6-man tag match, or the Royal Rumble. And again, I think the Royal Rumbles are really awful in these games, but I'm glad that it's there regardless. Royal Rumble uses the same tug-of-war grapple system as WWF Raw uses. And I think all the LJN games are going to be saddled with this god-awful control mechanic, which, in my opinion, makes the game kind of crappy to play, but it's what they wanted to do. When you get into a lockup, you just have to mash one of your face buttons, and then you'll do a move. And there's really not a whole lot of variety in the moves that you do. I really wish that I had a turbo controller when I was doing this, because my thumb was getting really goddamn tired by the time the second match came around. It's just a really awful mechanic. I would have preferred if they had a similar moveset or a similar control scheme to like Hammerlock Wrestling or even WCW Super Brawl, where you had a bunch of different moves and they were much easier to perform than this game. Overall, I think the gameplay is pretty good. It feels easier to do things in this than it did in Raw, but I still don't like the overall control scheme. Once again, this game looks really good. It seemed like LJN managed to figure out the graphics side of everything, but they still couldn't do their controls. And I know this isn't a game that was made by LJN, it was just published by them, but there always seems to be that running theme of LJN games being rather hit and miss. There are some minor graphical changes to the characters. Instead of coming up with different models that would actually make sense for each character, they just did a graphical change on one model. So, once again, you have Yokozuna looking somewhat smaller than Shawn Michaels for some godforsaken reason, or The Undertaker being the same height as everybody when he shouldn't be. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Everything else in the game looks really good. It's a well-detailed game. I think the crowd is pretty lively. I actually like the way the wrestlers are detailed, and I like the graphical changes to that one model. But again, it's kind of confusing when everybody's the same body shape. Overall, the graphics are really good. We're way past the awful graphics from like Steel Cage Challenge, where everything just looked like crap. This one looks very good, and that seems to be a running theme with the Super Nintendo games. They all look really good, but the gameplay isn't always there. I talked a little bit about the roster already, but it's always interesting to see who wasn't in this game. And also, I like the fact that this year in WWF, there were 3 different wrestlers that played Doink. I just find that really interesting. At least 3 wrestlers, according to their roster on SmackDown.com, or SmackDownHotel.com, I should say. It's also fun to see the wrestlers that I wish had been included in here. I really wanted there to be a game with Adam Bomb in it, and Bam Bam Bigelow, and, a bunch of other people. Like the Smoking Guns were in here, but they weren't included in the game. And yeah, I wish there were a number of wrestlers that were on the active roster or around WWF at the time that could have been included. Because, hey, who wouldn't want to play as Earthquake and have him go up against Papa Shango or something like that? It just would have been a lot more fun. And also, it would have been better if several of the tag teams that WWF had on their roster had been in here, because when you go into a tag match, it just kind of feels like a random pairing of wrestlers. It's not a problem for most people, but I just thought it was a little weird when I saw it. Some of these wrestlers would end up in the Sega Genesis version, and it was kind of fun to see that there was some difference between the 2 games. And yeah, I really hope that there's like a ROM hack out there that combines these 2 rosters, because that would be really cool to see, even if I haven't found it yet. There really isn't too much of a difference between WWF Raw and Royal Rumble. The thing that I found out was I just played it on an easier difficulty setting, so all the moves were easier to perform. And when I looked up stuff in the manual, I didn't really learn a whole lot that I hadn't already figured out from just playing WWF Raw. The control scheme is pretty dumb. You can do special moves in this if you really want to, but I never found those to be necessary, and I never met any of the conditions in order to do those moves. So, yeah, it was kind of pointless to go through this. I think the game really has good graphics, but this control scheme just is not great at all. I really hated the tug-of-war stuff. I just felt like it was a waste of my time. And I think this is going to be a problem for the other LJN game that I go through as well, because I'm playing these out of order. And I know that now, but I didn't really realize that until I started digging into them. Anyway, let's move on to my final thoughts and wrap this whole thing up. So I did like this game a lot more than WWF Raw. It's still kind of an average game with a bad control scheme, or at least one that I don't like that much. It is a good-looking game, but it could have been much better if they had fixed a lot of the gameplay issues. The LJN games on the NES either looked okay and played terribly, or they looked and controlled terribly. When they came to the Super Nintendo, the games all look good, but this control is kind of hit and miss. It sometimes works really well, but most of the time it's just a pain in your thumbs, to put it that way. I really wouldn't say that I liked it, even if it did function in some way. WWF Royal Rumble is probably my favorite so far of the licensed wrestling games. I still prefer Hammerlock Wrestling over this one. It's all really comes down to that control scheme. The visual presentation in Hammerlock Wrestling wasn't as good, but just having better controls made that game so much more tolerable and more fun to play than this one. It is a lot better than WCW Super Brawl, I will say that. And yeah, I don't really know what else to say, but I'm looking forward to seeing like the other wrestling games that are coming up. Hopefully I won't be too disappointed with them, but you never know. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I will talk to you all later. Bye.